Hello everyone, it's Kik here. Have you ever noticed that in teasers and trailers for Apple products, the time displayed on the screen is always 9:41 a.m.? Did you know that this is the exact time Steve Jobs first introduced the world to the iPhone? Welcome to an episode where you'll learn some of the most amazing and lesser-known facts about Apple. Make yourself comfortable, we're starting. We start with the fact that when you purchase Apple products and check the box agreeing to the terms and conditions, you are also agreeing not to use Apple products in the development, design, fabrication or production of nuclear, missile, chemical or biological weapons. Tough, we know. Speaking of weapons, there are videos online where many daring shooters fire at MacBooks. This spectacle can make many fans' blood boil. But few know that Apple often initiates such videos themselves, thus demonstrating that their laptops are designed to stop a bullet and save a life. We do not recommend trying such tests at home. Many smokers might find it strange, but in many countries with strict smoking laws, Apple may refuse to repair smartphones and other gadgets, even if they are under warranty. The reason is that cigarettes contain nicotine, and nicotine is quite a dangerous substance. The folks in Cupertino don't want their employees to be exposed to any dangers from nicotine, just like that. We all know that Apple is one of the most successful corporations in the world, and great success leads to big money. In 2011, the company had more cash on hand than the US government. Apple's market cap first exceeded $1 trillion in August 2018, reaching a market value of $1.6 trillion. Then the capitalization fell due to a decline in demand for the company's smartphones. In 2019, Apple's market cap again surpassed $1 trillion after the introduction of new iPhones, the Apple TV Plus service, and other company innovations. By market value, the Cupertino-based company was second only to Microsoft. The company earns up to $300,000 per minute. If the communists ever win in the United States and then expropriate the corporation, each inhabitant of the planet would receive just over $100. As you see, it's not worth it. Everyone knows the names of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who founded the company. But did you know there was a third co-founder? From the very beginning, his name was Ronald Wayne. Very few people know about him, despite the fact that he wrote the very first manual for the Apple One computer and also designed the first logo, which we will return to later. He is forgotten because he left the company, or rather the garage, on the 12th day of the future giant's existence. Wayne sold his 10% stake in Apple for $800. If you convert that amount to today's money, it's a figure that will make many clutch their hearts. His stake today would be worth $100 billion. But in the early days, not everything went smoothly, and Ronald was afraid to take the risk, unlike Jobs, who sold his car, and Wozniak, who sacrificed an engineering calculator. The very first logo was an image of Isaac Newton sitting under an apple tree. The aforementioned Ronald Wayne drew it. A year later, of course, the company realized that such a complex logo was not memorable, and Jobs instructed designer Rob Janoff to focus on the apple itself. Thus, one of the most recognizable logos in the world was born. The first version was called the Rainbow Apple, which was meant to emphasize that the Apple II computer had a color screen. There is also a belief that it was a tribute to Alan Turing, whose work laid the foundation for the creation of computers. Turing, by the way, was persecuted for his non-traditional orientation and eventually committed suicide by eating an apple poisoned with cyanide. Yes, the story is very interesting, but it does not correspond to the truth, as the so-called pride flag was developed only a year later. Subsequently, the Apple design underwent some updates, but the Apple's outline has never changed. Despite the simplicity of the logo, which would enter design trends many years after the creation of the Apple logo, the company never turned a blind eye to its products. Apple is a company that is painfully attentive to the smallest details. One such example is the screensaver on the Apple Watch smartwatches. Many might think that it is made using computer graphics, but this is not the case. Designers and photographers of the company spent hundreds of hours shooting and reshooting the blooming of dozens of flowers to achieve the desired effect, which, admit it, is mesmerizing. Another example of attention to detail were the virtual metallic buttons on the iPhone 6, the reflections on which changed depending on the angle at which the user held the smartphone. Before creating Apple, Jobs worked at Atari, which was then a leader in the computer games market. Traces of that time can be found in gadgets created at Apple. The first iPod contained an Easter egg. Those who found it were able to play one of the Atari games created by Jobs and Wozniak. This game was the well-known Breakout, released in 1976. Over time, the iPod underwent many changes from design and size to the hardware inside. Once, Steve Jobs dropped the first iPod prototype into water, not to show it was waterproof. He did it to show engineers the air bubbles, thereby indicating that there was a lot of space inside, and it could technically be made even more compact. Let's move on, but first, a subscription, which would be very timely. It motivates us to create more interesting content. So Siri, which can no longer be imagined without the iPhone and vice versa. But initially, Siri was not invented as a voice assistant. It was a web store application that was supposed to appear on Android devices and even BlackBerry in the future. But Apple took the initiative by first acquiring the Siri app and then making it exclusive to the company's devices. The default voice of Siri belongs to Susan Bennett, but it could have been very different, and the virtual assistant might have communicated with us in a male voice. More specifically, the voice of Jeff Goldblum, who is known from films like Jurassic Park, Independence Day, Thor, Ragnarok, and so on. But besides well-known devices and applications, Apple has a multitude of interesting projects. For example, they were the first in the world to introduce a color digital camera, and those were the times when people could wait weeks for their photos. They created a game console called Peepin', which cost $600. Apple also had its own line of clothing, hoodies, shirts, caps. In general, as you understood, those were pretty wild times, and they survived as best they could. In 1997, Apple released a limited edition personal computer, the TAM 20th Anniversary Macintosh. It was the Mac Pro of its time, created to celebrate the company's 20th anniversary. The price tag on that machine was an unheard of $7,500, which in today's money would be about $12,000. Initially, the price was higher and included special limousine delivery. Few will remember, but the Apple logo on laptops used to be upside down, leading to many amusing mishaps. Those using MacBooks for the first time sometimes even broke them before they could use them because they tried to open it from the wrong side. After that, the company decided it was best to flip the Apple. And since we're talking about MacBooks, there are many symbols on the company's keyboards that are puzzling to, say, Windows users. For example, the symbol on the Command key was originally supposed to be an apple, but Jobs, literally days before the release of the computer on which this key was first to appear, decided that the company logo was used too often. Eventually, Apple designer Susan Kare took as a basis a road sign used in Scandinavian countries that denotes an attraction. Everyone liked the symbol, and now it's on many keyboards. Swedes still call the button Ancient Monument. In 2007, Apple introduced the revolutionary iPhone and the iPhone OS operating system, which was later renamed iOS. This is known to many, but not everyone knows that the trademarks iPhone and iOS belonged to Cisco, another tech giant. Immediately after the iPhone presentation, Apple was sued. In the end, the companies reached an agreement that is not disclosed. And now the iPhone trademark is owned by Apple, but for iOS, which was introduced 3 years after the iPhone, Apple pays licensing royalties to Cisco. Apple had to acquire the iPad trademark from Fujitsu. The first iPhone, shown on stage by Jobs, had a plastic display. After the presentation, Steve demanded that by the start of sales, the smartphone should have a glass display only, because the plastic screen during the presentation got dented. And this was a star moment for the company Corning, which is now known to everyone for its Gorilla Glass displays. They had this glass before the iPhone, but it was gathering dust on the shelf because until that time, no one needed it. The first iPhone was a surprise not only for customers, but also for the press covering the device. Nothing was known about it, and there were no leaks. The code name for the first iPhone was M68, and even the developers themselves did not know what they were ultimately making. The software engineering team was not directly connected with the hardware engineering team. The device was tested on a special board that contained all the components of the future iPhone. But the first iPhone was not the first smartphone from Apple. In 1983, the company had a project for a landline phone with smart functions. It was a kind of mix between a phone and an iPad. Of course, it did not go into mass production, but many consider this device the progenitor and inspiration for the iPhone. As we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Apple uses the time 9:41 a.m. in its promotional materials. Initially, statistics were compiled showing that the key product at presentations was always introduced about 40 minutes from the start. The idea was to make it so that when the image of the iPhone was shown on the screen, the timestamps on it, and in reality would be as close as possible. Thus, all promotional materials were made with the time 9:41 a.m. and 9:42 a.m., just to be safe. In the end, of course, the iPhone itself was shown 52 minutes after the presentation started, but the actual block of the presentation where Jobs began the narrative about the iPhone started exactly at the 41st minute. Thus, this time has remained a good tradition and a kind of feature of all Apple promotional materials. We hope you enjoyed it. If so, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next episodes. We'll see you very soon. Bye!